I want to bring in some of my panelists who just joined me in studio. Kenneth Okwara is the director, ASEPIS, that stands for Africa's Center for People, Institutions and Society, and John Gashia, veteran journalist and also a policy analyst. I want to start from where we just asked our viewers to give us their opinion. Do you think the two leaders have done enough to stop the strife in South Sudan? Let's start with you, Ken.
Well, the two leaders give the facade that they are doing stuff to cease violence, to commit to managing the conflict and moving into resolving the conflict. But that is what the media and all of us see. But behind those leaders or behind their constituencies, there are people who hold more power than them, who perhaps I think are the ones who either usurp or either make it look like whatever they say in front of us does not make sense. For example, in the side of the government, there is a general from the north, Bail Ghazal, called General Paul Manuel. He has a lot of power, and he's said, if you ask people within South Sudan, they will tell you that he has power over Salva Kiir, though that is not what is out in the media or in conversations that we are having. And therefore, even when the violence broke out, Machar and Kiir were having a conference, but their constituencies or their people were starting violence. So it tells you that much as we might think that what they're saying is true, but there are people behind them who perhaps may be doing things apart from what they tell us that they're doing. Yeah,
John, Ken is alluding that there's a third force per se who's pulling the strings behind the scenes. You've covered South Sudan for quite some time as a journalist. Is that necessarily true? And what went wrong with this peace deal? We've seen several others, but the latest one was in 2015 in Addis Ababa. What went wrong with that peace deal?
Thank you, Trevor. For me, perhaps is that the international community was so desperate for a peace that they gave what I would call a bad peace. They engaged in what I would call band aid. Now, what am I perhaps alluding to? That the issues around the power struggle, the issues around the competition for power, the issues around South Sudan being almost dysfunctional are much more deeper than that. The international community specifically was so keen on getting rid of what they felt was a small problem in relation to Syria, Libya, Afghanistan and Iraq. But perhaps they failed to address the core issues. What are the core issues? The core issues, in my view, are the peace dividend. The peace dividend for who? Those that were in the war and those that were in the diaspora and those that remained. There were three groups in South Sudan, and you have to address the different competing needs. My colleague here refers to possibly there being what we would call proxies, or possibly groups that do not buy into the peace process. It was quite evident, even when the peace agreement was cobbled together, I would say that. It was more signed what we call a shotgun marriage. Indeed, both Riek and Salva expressed very serious reservations about the entirety of the peace process. Now, perhaps when you listen to the IGAD ministers, they made a fairly interesting comment for me. At least they're acknowledging a certain element: command and control, security sector reforms. That is a key. You have to address the issues of security, the issues of a very militarized society, and you have to address that. And you could do anything you so wish, but until you address those. Now, is Salva held hostage? Perhaps the same can be said. Is Riek Machar held hostage? And I think what you're seeing now is that the two principles appear, in my view, to be losing consensus within their core supporters, both Riek Machar and the president.
And Ken, the military issue was addressed in the 2015 peace accord. There was the demilitarization of the capital, that's Juba, and they both signed this. So who bears the highest brunt? Who should be the one who takes greater responsibility for this turmoil?
But if you look at it, they say there's a 25-kilometer radius demilitarized zone.
Yes. Only the presidential guard
which technically, if you look at it from a security perspective, it sort of like locks Riek Machar's people within that circle, so that like right now when there is violence, they cannot leave beyond that circle. You see, like the Juba bridge, they can't go beyond that. It means even that demilitarization process is ineffective, or to some extent is not helping to solve those security issues. And there has also been allegations, or sort of an argument, that the SPLA guys who were supposed to remove their uniforms and move back to their barracks, a lot of them are still within Juba.
So whose failure is this? Is it the peace accord that was designed to fail, or is it the leaders who are not implementing what they agreed to?
You know, the process of resolving a conflict like this, it takes 3 main stages. You have the conflict management process, and that first stage is when you want to put people together so that they commit to share power or to bring back order.
Yeah.
Right? I think there have been faults or misgivings within the process, to the extent that they then jumped into resolving, getting into resolution. Well, they were not sure that these two parties, for example, were one, committed, plus their coalitions or their constituencies, to finding a solution to the problem. And therefore, the people who are in there who are, for example, doing peacekeeping, I think if the role strictly of peacekeepers, for example, that is supposed to make sure that they prevent, relapse into to violence, how much are they doing? How much is UNMISS that is in Juba or within South Sudan doing to prevent these relapses into violence? Because for more than 4 times over the process, when these people were in Addis or after even signing this deal in 2015, these guys have relapsed into violence. So what role is the peacekeeping mission doing with regards to preventing these warring parties from getting back into violence?
Is this a regional issue, or is it the two leaders who have failed, John, in terms of, if by your own analysis?
My own analysis, one, I think is that the international community bears the largest blame for this. It was in a hurry to cobble up a peace that was not and did not address the core issues. That's one. The regional countries, and here, Trevor, there are 4 countries that call and have perhaps the means, in a way, to hold the 2 accountable. We start Sudan, Ethiopia, Uganda, and Kenya. Now, they all have fairly vested strategic, military, commercial, and humanitarian issues. What have they done? In many ways, they have not used the leverage that they have, both from an economic, a political, and possibly even a military point of view. Now, the IGAD, right now we are hearing, some people are talking about that IGAD perhaps needs to move in, perhaps address from a military point of view. The demilitarization and demobilization, the security sector reforms is a key. How was it handled? It is still out in the open. It has not been addressed sufficiently on both parties. And let me perhaps share a few figures. The latest numbers indicate that there are in excess of possibly over 5 million small arms in civilian hands in Sudan.
And there was a threat to actually include an arms embargo on that. I will bring you, Ken, in just a bit. But for now, armed confrontations that started on Thursday last week closed this 5th South Sudan independence anniversary, which was celebrated on Saturday, have left the world concerned of a second civil war. The fighting continued today. A spokesman for the Vice President Riek Machar said that the country was back at war as rival factions clashed and hundreds were reported missing. Vice President Riek Machar said there was heavy aerial bombardment in areas where his loyalist forces are based, accusing President Salva Kiir of not being interested in the peace agreement. UN Secretary General Ban Ki-moon has condemned the senseless violence, saying it yet again illustrates the party's lack of serious commitment to the peace process and betrayal of the people of South Sudan. President Uhuru Kenyatta regretted the renewed fighting in South Sudan, saying it was truly a very sad and difficult time for the country. India's External Affairs Minister Sushma Swaraj said Indian nationals were being evacuated and warned others not to travel to the country. That's not all. The head of Red Cross missions in South Sudan, Jag Eglin, has said everything has come to a halt because there was too much confusion, too much shooting and too much commotion. Checkpoints are making movement even impossible. The UK government, though, through their Minister for Africa, condemned the widespread fighting in Juba, expressing shock at attacks at the UN bases, saying those responsible for the violence should be held to account. The United States has started evacuating the non-emergency staff from their missions. A statement from the US State Department said the security situation was a sudden and serious deterioration. That's the international community speaking. Is that enough? Giving threats and saying things, it's a senseless killing, and calling for the stoppage of it. Is it enough?
I think, like I said, for this process to take off, for them to get any substantive resolution that will hold, that initial process of making the two parties commit and seriously commit with their constituencies to cease violence, for example, to give up their arms. If the report that you've just given now, it's reported that they were using helicopter gunships within Juba. So what are we talking about? If we were talking about taking away arms, for example, in dam, so that people can get this resolution to work, then who is monitoring that process, and why do they still have this amount of arms that they then use to antagonize each other side? But there's a point regarding how the East African leaders have treated the leaders, these two leaders, Riek Machar and Salva Kiir, that I also find to be a problem with resolving the whole issue. You see, the way things are going on in South Sudan, the president, we cannot say strictly that he has legitimacy over the state that is South Sudan.
Yeah.
Right. So when East African governments or leaders pose with him as though it's okay that he is among them logically, among them legitimately, then it makes it very hard for the other side that perhaps if they want to commit themselves to what they have resolved, to be happy or to continue to commit to that.
Yes.
So can the East African heads of states as well commit to not treating the president of South Sudan as though he is normal, like them? Yes.
And I want to bring in John on this. You've covered that region quite a lot. South Sudan coverage. Kiir is seen as a good commander, and Machar is also there. He seems to be like a power-hungry person. Is there a potential for a third leader as we wind up on this? Do they need a third leader?
Unfortunately, there is a third force. The problem is that the third force doesn't have the critical mass, as it were. And the third force is more of the Sudanese people who are trying to disengage from this too polarizing situation. But perhaps, Trevor, to come back to what he said, the key issue is the mandate of United Nations mission to South Sudan. Is it a peacekeeping mission or is it a peace enforcement mission?
All right.
Unfortunately, what we are seeing right now is the mandate of a UN peace force that cannot really address the core issues of demobilization, security sector, and peace enforcement. As we are sitting out here, for me, Trevor, is that I'm finding this all of a sudden hue and cry that 370 people died. You're forgetting that in the last 2 years, 50,000 people have died. You're forgetting that right now, as we are talking, there's various arms coming into South Sudan? Who is importing? Where are they coming from? Where does Riek get his equipment from? Where does Salva get his ammunition from? Who is going to hold them accountable? Where are the sanctions? What is Kenya doing? What is Ethiopia doing? What is Sudan and Uganda?
Okay. All right. I'm running out of time here, but Ken, I wanted to give you the final say. Is it time to deploy the AU troops, yes or no? We're running out of time here.
Oh, well, yes and no.
So it's both. Really briefly.
Yes. With regards to, first of all, figuring out and saying clearly that this is what they're going to do.
Yeah.
Because the UN mission that is there, like has been mentioned, clearly they are not capable either technically or with the resources that they have to enforce.
And no?
Yeah. No is if they're going to go in there without that kind of a mandate and without the resources that they need to do, they shouldn't do it because they'll just waste people's time as people continue to be slaughtered and die.
Okay. All right. Yeah. Thanks for making time. That's Kenneth Okwaro, Director, ACPC. It stands for Africa Center for People, Institutions and Society. And John Gashia, veteran journalist and also a policy analyst. We're delving into the South Sudan issue and whether it's time to deploy the AU troops. You know that the leaders have done enough to stop the war.